we are recording.
No countdown.
No countdown. Oh my God. What a magical day this is. Hello and welcome to SnarkSquad Pod, the media podcast where we eat honor for breakfast. I'm Nicole Sweeney.
My name is Marines.
And joining us this week is...
Abby Ryan.
Hello, Abby. Introduce yourself.
Oh, man. I am a person that watches the media. I don't know. I work for a production company. I do administrative stuff, but in my free time, I like to watch a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Abby is, I've mentioned previously on the podcast, I have a group of friends that I can reliably call upon to consume shitty television with me. Abby is part of that group of content pals. Ooh. So today we are talking about Westworld. As always, this will be full of spoilers for the entire first season of Westworld. The second season starts soon, so we thought now would be a good time to go back and revisit all of season 1. So to kick us off with a plot synopsis, Abby, what the heck happened?
Oh, man. Well, what didn't happen, I guess, is a better question. So to start off, Westworld is this place, Western-themed place where people can go for recreation. People basically purchase entry to this place. It is populated by a bunch of AIs or robots that are called hosts that run different stories that these people can pay to be a part of. So there are a series of main hosts, the oldest of which is named Dolores. She also has a love interest named Teddy. There's a saloon that is run by a host named Maeve. And in the background, so in addition to this Western world where people can do what they want to do, there's also this whole team behind it that is running it in this kind of like underground bunker fortress. It's pretty extensive and almost like ridiculously extensive.
Yeah, the shots of like the
going down,
walkways and stuff. Or staircases. That's the one.
And they take this like massive elevator down to this level that no one uses, and we don't know why. But it's run by this guy named Robert Ford and has been going for a while, and he's kind of the brain behind it. So Ford is creating this new story, but at the same time within Westworld, we have these hosts that are malfunctioning. There seems to be some sort of error in this new code that they've introduced, and some need to be decommissioned. So there's all of this stuff going on. The hosts are acting weird in their narratives, and so that's kind of how the story starts. You're starting to see this breakdown within this programming system. We are also introduced by people who have come into Westworld to be a part of the narrative. We're introduced to these two guys, Logan and William, who are...
Prince Caspian?
Yes.
Oh my God. Stop. Narnia was my jam.
Logan and William are just there because William is going to be marrying Logan's sister. So they're kind of brother-in-laws, and Logan is kind of taking William on his last hurrah. Also, you see this guy who is very clearly supposed to be the evil guy. He is this man in black. That's all you hear his name.
He's literally credited as the man in black.
Yes. In all my notes, he's just MIB.
Yeah.
Like, this is great. Yeah, so he's kind of this ruthless, violent character who knows that all of these hosts are robots, and he's just like... It seems like kind of just running rampant and clearly searching for this thing, this maze that he feels like is hidden within Westworld. So anyway, back to the host. This it's just so much, I don't think.
No, you're doing good.
So back to Dolores, who is the oldest host. Her father starts malfunctioning, and she starts having these weird visions, and at one point kills a fly, which they're not supposed to be able to kill anything. She asks her love interest Teddy to help her learn to shoot, which she can't do at first, but then gets assaulted by the man in black and his cronies, basically, and then finds out that she has the capability to be more violent. When that happens, she runs away and ends up running into Logan and William, the two guys who are kind of on their bachelor party type thing. And she and William basically hit it off and fall in love and have this story while they're adventuring through this series of narratives. Meanwhile,
On the ranch. Literally.
The host Maeve, who is this saloon/brothel runner person, is having these flashbacks and these weird experiences, these weird malfunctions. So she's also a host. She gets damaged and wakes up in the facility where they repair these hosts, this futuristic underground bunker thing. They're not supposed to wake up during that, but for some reason she does, and she realizes that there's this whole underlying thing going on, that, you know, she is an AI, and so she tries to figure out what's going on. The techs who were working on her to try to repair her, she basically enlists their help, goes through this whole process where they increase her intelligence, they decrease her loyalty, she kind of becomes this super AI, she can control other AIs, and so she's going through this basically arc to figure out what's going on, who she is, what it all means, and then eventually trying to get out of Westworld.
Everyone needs to stretch your legs, take a quick coffee break.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry, but there's just so much. So while Maeve is doing this whole process of discovery and figuring out that she is an AI, Dolores and Ford, who is the creator of Westworld, and this man in black keep coming across this church, which is at various states of being buried or not buried. And so you keep getting these images of this steeple and some images where you're not sure kind of when it happened. You're not sure what exactly is going on, but you're seeing kind of the same thing from different perspectives. The church has something to do with Ford's new narrative, but you're not exactly sure what. I forgot to talk about Bernard at the beginning. Dang it. So another character, let's just mark this down on the list of things you need to remember. He's the head programmer at Westworld. He's working on this new series of code. He's trying to fix the AIs who are malfunctioning. He figures out that there's this corporate plot going on behind the scenes where other people, including the operations person, like head of operations, Teresa, they're trying to oust Ford, the main guy. And Bernard figures out this plot, but he also finds this secret cabin thing that Ford's created within Westworld. So he shows one of the corporate manager people. In the process of doing that, Bernard realizes that he is also a host.
What?
They find blueprints. It's like this massive twist. He finds out that he is an AI that has been built based on Ford's partner Arnold, which then gives Bernard the title Bernarnold.
Key.
Honestly, that's all I wanted in the synopsis, was to get Bernarnold in there somewhere.
Everything has been building towards that moment. We're done now.
Was the maze.
Thanks for
Done. Westworld. Thanks for listening. Yeah, so Bernarnold kills this Teresa, this corporate manager person, and then ends up getting his memories wiped and then reinstated, and then he ends up being forced to commit suicide by Ford. It's like this whole series of events where Bernard is just trying to figure out who he is and deal with all of the things that he has been programmed to do. At the same time, Dolores is still having her memory flashes when she realizes and has these flashes that Arnold, who...
Actual live human.
Arnold.
Yeah, not to be confused with Bernarnold.
Right. Back many, many years ago, right before Westworld opened, Arnold realized that the hosts were more than what they seemed. This AI was kind of developing this consciousness, and Arnold wanted to encourage that. Arnold wanted to find the pathway to consciousness for these AIs, but realized what was happening and programmed Dolores to actually kill all of the hosts in Westworld and then also kill Arnold. So she figures this out. She is back at the church. This is kind of like the center point of the whole story. She runs into the man in black, who then reveals that he is William, who she fell in love with. Another major plot point, half of what you've been seeing so far was 30 years ago. So you realize at this point that all of these scenes with William and Logan and some of the flashback scenes were all happening at the beginning, at the inception of Westworld. And so the Man in Black has had this whole tragic story where he kind of
You couldn't see it, but Mari and I had reactions.
It is presented as a tragic story in which he has this whole life and is sad that he's come back to Westworld to find Dolores, and Dolores didn't remember him, and so then becomes, I don't know, kind of this ruthless person. And so that all gets revealed, and now he's looking for this maze, which he doesn't realize isn't for him. It is for the AIs.
The maze isn't meant for you.
He doesn't realize that even though the maze isn't meant for you, is like repeated time and time again.
They fucking
Multiple
tell you
times.
that, bro.
But he doesn't seem to care. He just like has this one-track mind, and he gets to the maze and he's disappointed, but it turns out the maze, it's just the maze of consciousness. It's for the AIs to figure out how to reach consciousness. So they end up, Dolores and the Man in Black have an altercation. They escape. Dolores dies on the beach in Teddy's arms, which is revealed to also be part of Ford's narrative. So none of this is anybody's doing. It's all just Ford saying what's supposed to be happening. And then they have this big corporate party to release this new narrative, and somehow Dolores is back again, and she shoots Ford. And then all of these hosts kind of like revolt and are approaching this party. They descend on these guests with the intention, it seems, to wreak havoc.
Kill them all. Mm-hmm.
And one last thing in the meantime, Maeve is trying to plan her escape. She's decided she's going to go. She realizes that this was all programmed from the very beginning. And at the very last moment, she's getting on the train to leave Westworld, decides that she needs to find her daughter, decides to break from the programming, and comes back into Westworld to do that. End.
Damn. So long. Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah, there are a lot of moving parts in this show, and I think that is definitely one of those things that like either you're going to be really into it or you're not. It was really fun watching this with you guys on our couch. Me and our friend Sylvia had seen it and nobody else had. And like, as everybody is like, oh my God, what is this? What is that? Mari also like sent me a couple messages that I was just like, I'm ignoring this. I'm not answering you. But I will say I'm excited to have Abby here, because when we were doing our big group watch, Abby said less things, but most of the things she said were correct. And so I have this whole, Sylvia and I had this whole text chain that was just a lot of like, go Abby, go. Abby, come on, do it, Abby. So, yeah.
I think also in addition to having a lot of moving parts, the plot is probably difficult to explain or summarize because you don't know the full picture until literally episode 10.
Yes.
Like it's building all of these things. It's like a maze, it's a mystery box. So you're getting all of these pieces. And then even now I'm looking back and trying to think like, okay, I know the ending. How do those things play out? Like I know now about the timelines, but I didn't know when I was watching it. So I don't know like how that changes, how I would have watched it. So it's all these things that build that you can't even really talk about the plot itself without talking about the ending. But then the ending colors the beginning and you're in like this full loop by that point.
You need the whole thing to make any kind of sense out of it. Even I am forgetting now specific examples, but there was something you said when you were giving the plot synopsis, and in my head I was like, oh, that's interesting, because in my head I track that elsewhere. Like, and just how and where you track all of the different timelines. I think, the maze, for example, like to what degree this is actually a question. To what degree do you think the maze is just the thing that Arnold originally created for Dolores, or like did Ford do something else to like reactivate that like plot, that through line?
That's a great question.
I need time. Hold on. I think there had to be an element of Ford reintroducing this. I think all of the foundation was probably laid down by Arnold as this thing that he set up as the original game, he told Dolores, look for the maze at the beginning, because it was his way of introducing, or like, you know, what was going to lead to consciousness. I think there was an element of Ford bringing that almost like back online, so to speak, because he was the one who started putting in the backstories in Teddy and in Dolores to a certain extent, that brought them through the narrative that brought them to the maze.
He made it social. Arnold's game was specifically for Dolores, and it was Dolores alone. He was concentrating on Dolores, whereas, like, I mean, I agree or disagree, but I feel like what you just said is that essentially, like, Ford then came in and said, okay, no, we need other AIs need to be part of this. Like, you make Teddy part of it and whatnot, and like then you get there.
So it was almost like Arnold's original idea was that you go on the singular journey of self-discovery, where Ford came in and made it a narrative. He made it a story with multiple moving parts, with people like pushing and pulling, and then that led to the self-discovery in the end.
And Ford even talks about this concept of needing suffering in order to be able to reach consciousness. And so I don't think that was a thing that was necessarily introduced by Arnold. So you don't suffer in a vacuum.
Right.
There's a reason for it. And so having this whole series of events where Dolores is kind of coming to terms with what she had done and how that affected everyone around her, it is a social thing, and it is a thing that I think Ford had to reintroduce or at least manipulate in some way.
I just really like this a lot. I'm really excited.
That idea was one that I really wanted to talk about, that Ford had, that the cornerstone of a personality or a backstory was suffering, and he put that into a lot of his hosts, which I thought was really interesting. And then I went back and forth on how that plays across the season, because in the end, we see that Maeve goes back for her daughter. And that is a storyline that is very much centered in suffering, because her daughter was pulled away from her and killed in front of her, but she lives on. But it's also kind of cemented in love. And we don't get a lot of love stories throughout this at all. Like, you think William is going to be it for a while, but then it turns out that's totally not the case. And then Teddy is there for a little while, but that is so scripted and programmed that you're not sure how to feel about it. So love doesn't get a lot of lip service here. Suffering does. But then you have that great speech by Dolores where she starts talking about how grief opens up all of this space inside of her. Like, you know, I love that whole thing. I love explorations of grief, and the way she described like how it was like opening, yawning spaces inside of her. And then Bernard asked her, did you come up with that? Did you improvise that? And she says, I adapted it from lines you gave me about love. So the way that she describes grief as opening all of these new frontiers, but that was like also true about love, that interplay of what is the cornerstone of your personality, your narrative. It's so focused on grief, but it could shift in the other direction. So
yeah, I don't think suffering or grief can happen in the absence of love. And so that's like the opposite side of the coin. If you suffer, you have loved.
Oh, man. So we are less than 20 minutes into this podcast, and already getting real deep.
I think it's important in terms of the story, not just like in deep, like suffering grief, because they give all of these hosts really terrible and tragic backstories on the idea that, you know, they need them to be real. But I think it's part of what makes you immediately on the side of the hosts. Like, you're immediately like, this is fucked up, because they give them such like deep, hurtful backstories, and you almost tell you like they need them to be real. But I don't know, it still makes me feel, of all the things that make me feel really icky about this entire world, the fact that they give him like dead children, multiple people, dead children, just to like lead them on this path to being fully realized is really strange and really icky.
Bernard has a whole conversation with Ford about that. It's just like why the fuck would you give me this? Like, you could have made me anything, and why this? I'm going to back up. Usually we start this with our baseline question, and like then we jump into the deep end. Like we kind of already did that. But our baseline question, did you enjoy this?
Absolutely. This is exactly my kind of thing. I normally don't like Western stuff, and the fact that it took Western and moved it into the sci-fi realm, that made me like it a lot. Plus the high level psychology is the thing that just, yep, that's my cup of tea.
I also really, really enjoyed this to the point that I was sending yelling text messages and messages to Nicole that she then ignored completely. But I had like an immediate and like visceral emotional reaction to this story. It is exactly my cup of tea as well. It's got a sprawling landscape, like huge setting for these very narrow and focused character studies. My jam. Like it is very psychological. My jam. It does have like the sci-fi elements. Like it was a story that was deeply, deeply for me. And it is, I think, so part of what I do to get ready for these episodes is I always look up reviews, and not the review itself for the content, because I don't want like other people's ideas like contaminating my own, but I look at the comments because I'm always very curious, or like grades and ratings, because I'm curious what other people thought about this. Generally, was it a good thing, well received or not? And I feel like people who are watching this real time thought it was a little bit slow. And I've heard from friends who tried to watch this and thought it was boring. But I think this was for me because I really enjoy I enjoy bringing my own questions to a piece of media. I enjoy digging deep. I enjoy being like, ooh, what could this be? So if you're coming for like a mile a minute nonstop, like if you want all of the answers hand delivered to you, this probably won't be your jam. But if you don't mind like digging in deep with the story, this is for you. And so it was for me.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything both of you just said. The intensity of the character studies, just very, very interesting. Like all of the big questions that it asks about, like what it is to be human and morality. And it asked all of those questions in ways that were interesting and thoughtful. And for the sake of adding something else to this, I will also say it's just like deeply sociologically interesting too. And so there's a lot there. And in this world that I found very, very interesting. I started watching it after it had finished its run, and I watched the first episode and was like, okay, I can't binge this. I'm gonna need a minute after the like very, very brutal rape scene with the man in black and Dolores in the first episode. That was like, it's just like a lot. But then after that, my pace accelerated quite a bit and overall enjoyed it. But it was an intense experience. And so I wonder to what degree that is a barrier to entry for some people. It's definitely one that I can understand. I can totally see like watching that and being like, nope, this is not for me. But yeah, on the whole, I thoroughly enjoyed this.
I think that this is probably like a push and pull of this show, is that I think it's probably tempered by the darkness of the material and like needing that breathing space in that room to be like, okay, that got a little intense, lots of blood, lots of nudity, lots of dark themes. But also I had to binge it. I mean, I binged it and I watched 5 episodes or so in a row. Then I was like, Nicole, I'm recapping this. I went back to episode 1 and I started recapping, which I've done almost all 5 episodes that I originally watched.
And look for that soon on SnarkSquad.com.
It's coming to the blog. And then I finished watching pretty much last night to the end. So I had to binge it, but because I felt that the plot is also very metered out. So it's like, it gives you all of these little scraps, and I just like had to know. So I feel like one or the other is either going to push you away. Either it's too dark and you need to slow down, or the plot is coming too slowly. And for people who were watching it real time and couldn't binge like I was binging, I feel like that may have been a problem where you're like, oh my God, like what are we doing here? Get to the end, what's the end game? And so I see that also being a thing. So I feel like binging was probably best for me with this show.
Yeah, I can see that. It's a little bit hard, like, because none of us watched it real time. So like it's hard to actually speak to that experience. But like, yes, I agree. I think there's definitely something to the idea of you get 1 hour a week and then you have a whole week to sort of think about it and talk about it. And this is frequently how we consume media. So like this is a very relatable, and it's a little bit like with Game of Thrones, how they teased the idea of Jon's parentage for an entire like season and a half before we actually got that confirmation. And it got to a point where we're just like, okay, like this is like, we fucking know, we figured it out. And I can see how, for me, because I watched it at an accelerated enough pace, I definitely did not deduce, most of these major things, the fact that Bernard and Arnold are the same person, or or that the Man in Black and William are the same person. It's a lot of people being the same person. I didn't deduce any of that. I like did not work any of that out. But I think, yes, if you're watching it one episode a week, especially if you're watching all of the like behind the scenes and like if you're spending more time with it than just that hour a week, like if you're really letting it like sit with you and you're thinking about it, you probably could be putting some of those pieces together on a weekly basis. And so then you're like, okay, I've known this for like 3 fucking weeks already. Yeah. Please just tell me the thing. So yeah, I think you're probably right that binging, or at least it's something akin to binging, maybe a tighter timeline is probably better for watching this.
I'd be interested to hear if either of you guys had this experience, but because we binged all 10 episodes in the same day, I had watched, I guess, 2 or 3 episodes previous and fell off of the train. It was probably a year before we watched, we did our binging session, and it was like a lot and really intense, and it just kind of put me off at first. But after the 10 episode binge session, I was so exhausted. I don't think I've ever felt so just like drained after binging a bunch of stuff. And that was really interesting because I felt like it was very much a mental exhaustion from having to try to deal with some of these concepts. At the same time, we're like, okay, next episode, it's time. You don't have time to process.
We got a lot of content to get through today, pals.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the show really, it was a mental exercise for me because I think it did a really good job, like reminding me of certain things throughout the narrative. So basically I would be watching and I would be like, all the humans are horrible.
Mm-hmm. Like, fuck the humans.
Yeah, fuck the humans. Like the humans are the worst. And then the show would come in and be like, hey, remember? The hosts are not real. Or like somewhere you're like, it's all a game, and the hosts are not real. And I'm like, oh, I know, but I hate the humans.
I hate the humans.
So it's like the warring ideas inside of me of like trying to figure out, which I think it's probably one of the main themes of the show. Like, does the park really bring out somebody's baser instincts, or is this who they are all along? And for a while, you're thinking with William, well, maybe it's a journey of self-discovery that leads to something better. And then they're like, nah, because he's the Man in Black. And then you're like, oh, way worse. Yeah. So it's like, maybe it is the baser instincts, but I never liked William, which I'm that's going to be like my hipster moment. Like, I didn't like William from the beginning, and you will see in the recaps, like from the beginning, I'm like, who is this nice guy, TM? Like, he is like a generic nice guy, and he just rubbed me the wrong way from the beginning. But I don't know, there was something about that idea of like, are these people who go there always bad? Or is there something about the park that brings it out in them? And that kind of like going around in circles, that's what really made me tired. I was like, I gotta go.
Yeah. That idea is one that I also just like find very, very fascinating in general. And this is kind of back at the beginning, like all the ways in which this show was like, you know, my jam for all of us. We all had that experience. But like that whole thing of, to what degree is this something innate in you? To what degree is this something that like the world is encouraging? I definitely come down on the side of the world is encouraging. Like, to me, I think like human beings are social creatures. We are not taking action in a vacuum almost ever. And an environment that is structured towards like bad shit in a way that, you know, like literally, what's his name? The guy who does the stories, I forget his
Ford.
name. Not
No,
Ford. The
Sizemore
younger guy.
Oh,
Thank you. Yes.
yeah.
That guy. Yeah. Almost every speech he gives is
Awful.
like, yeah.
Least favorite character by
he's
far.
the worst. He's 100% the worst. But yeah, you know, he's talking about all of the ways in which he views it as giving people what they want, as like what they came for. But like also he is constructing a world that is designed to encourage the worst. I think there's also something that the show doesn't explore because it takes place in the confines of the world, but it alludes to the fact that, for example, everybody who is a guest in the park is bonkers wealthy. Mm-hmm. And so there is a whole like separate conversation to be had about what levels of entitlement people are coming into this space with and how that also feeds into the, you know, garbage humans that they become inside this space. But yeah, all of that is like very, very, it's complicated and interesting. And there is a lot of like,
Like I want to hit on several points of what you said, and I don't know where to go first. The entitlement piece of it, this is gonna like open a whole other thing that I came prepared to talk about. But the entitlement thing was like super big for me because they give us a little bit. It felt like almost like lip service to there being a diverse group of people who attend the park. So you see at one point like a black family that comes across Dolores in a field, and why you would bring children to this park at all is beyond me. Beyond me. Like even if you stay in the like the safe town, there is a daily or weekly or whatever it is like shootout at the saloon. Like why? I don't know.
No, if you bring a child into this park, like CPS should be notified immediately.
So they pay this like lip service of like other people come here, look at the black family. And at one point there was like a man with like who had a wife and she was black as well. And I think, you see a few people of color like mingled in there. But for the most part, this is a park for wealthy white guys.
Yes.
And there's that moment where Logan, who is supposed to be the asshole, gives this whole speech about how they come to this park to get power that they don't have on the outside. And I'm like, bro, you are a wealthy white guy. Like, what power are you lacking on the outside that you need to come shoot human-like people on the inside to like rape and kill and murder to feel like you have power? Like that whole idea was just, it made me feel so icky in a way that I think the show was encouraging on purpose. Mm-hmm. But the part where it made me feel icky, where I don't think the show did a good job exploring, was the racial dynamics. Yeah. So you have Confederate soldiers in the narrative. You have savage Native Americans in the narrative. The two people of color that we have in the main cast are Maeve and Bernard, and they're both hosts. They're both being...
You also have, what's his name? Hector.
Hector is also a host. So all these three hosts are the robots that are being basically manipulated and enacted upon by the white storyteller, the god. And like there's so many of those little things that they did with race within the story that I just think were so really, really not handled well. Like you cannot set your world, even if it's in the future and it's sci-fi and it's fantasy, in a Western, You've studied everything that has to do with this world in order to make it accurate. Then you throw savages in, and then you put Confederate soldiers in, but you do not discuss race at all. And you've basically made a park for wealthy white guys. Oh, that's so disgusting to me.
Well, especially because it wouldn't have been that hard to also acknowledge it. To say like, yeah, that is ultimately what this space is. That's who's going to be coming here. But like, the narrative should have done something to engage with that fact or that idea in some meaningful way, and it did not at all.
Yeah, there was tons of room for it, and in a way that could have been an additional commentary on all of these things, and they're just like, no, we're gonna pretend it's not a thing.
Yeah. Look,
even though everyone can see it.
Look at our multiracial hosts. We did it. Diversity.
There was a moment where when we first met Maeve, I also sent this to Sweeney in text message. It's like everything about her like first aesthetic and just her like the way that I was like, oh my God, I want to be here for Halloween. And then I got really scared that she would be like a bit background person. So I was really excited when they like upped her like in the significance of the story. Like I really liked Maeve's whole story and whole thing. And my one problem with Maeve was that I thought that she was getting too superpowered, like too quickly. And I think it was a little bit convenient that one surgeon, Felix, I think is his name, was just like, yeah, have anything you want. Like, bro, you just made a superhero robot. Like, why? Like, I don't understand why you did that. But I think it kind of came back around and became satisfying when you realize that she was programmed to escape. And now there's a whole other level of like, what is going on? Yes. So even the complaints I had about her story had a payoff. So I really enjoyed her entire arc. Probably was one of my favorites in the story.
Yeah, hers was really interesting. And this also kind of goes back to how much Ford introduced to the idea of the maze and like to what extent was Maeve also being sent on her own, like maze journey, and like, I don't know, and just like questions about like why these particular hosts were chosen for this project.
I particularly like seeing Dolores kind of being presented in parallel with Maeve. and like seeing these two paths to consciousness that were different, like vastly different. Maeve was very active in her pursuit, whereas Dolores kind of had things happen to her and like was having these visions and didn't really like have a choice. I thought it was interesting to see that it wasn't just exciting to see that it wasn't just Dolores, first of all, but getting to see kind of individuals within these AIs.
We were talking a little bit about like the fucked up nature of the park and the narratives, but when I realized that Dolores's whole loop was coming back to her ranch, her parents being killed, and even if the man in black wasn't there, like being raped by whoever was on hand, like that was her loop. Like I think that was the first moment where I was like, wow.
What the fuck?
Yeah. Like, okay, when they're like talking about these narratives that they're building. So Sizemore, we mentioned, is one of my least favorite characters, not only because he's like awful, but I think he was like one-dimensionally awful in a story that was otherwise pretty nuanced and stuff. I think that Ford had a great line when he had his big reveal about his new narrative, and Ford tells Sizemore all that story revealed was about like who you are.
Yes.
It's not going to reveal anything to the guest. Like it just told me who you are, and I was like, "Yep."
Which
like,
is totally like back to the point about, you know, to what degree is the park revealing things or encouraging things? Like, yes, like it's that. Like you are making choices. Like you are constructing the options in which people are operating. So like to pretend that this is just all them and that like, no.
and it's like gamified and it's rewarded and you get, you know, you revealed more deeper levels of the park, and it's almost like this thing like, how far have you gotten? Like I've reached the outer limits of the park, but to do so you had to increasingly get more violent and, you know, the whole white hat versus black hat thing.
Right. There's that conversation on the train at the very, very beginning, as like when we first see the train riding into Westworld in episode 1, there's an overheard conversation with like two non characters. And this one guy is like, yeah, the first time I was here, I went white hat. But then last time I came back and I went full black hat, and it was the best 2 weeks of my life. I was like, yeah, because it's structured in that way,
right,
that it, like to reward that. And you could gamify it in the opposite direction.
Basically, what you're revealing is that humans have the capacity for violence. Hooray. Congratulations. We didn't know because of something called history. Good job, Westworld.
Yeah. I feel like a necessary part of having this conversation is like some sort of acknowledgement of how deep this bench was of redonkulously gifted actors. Just like every single person is so good. Like Ed Harris is the Man in Black. The degree to which he like is evil by just standing there.
Right.
Which like I went in and I was like commenting on the first Westworld recap, episode 1 recap.
SnarkSquad.com.
SnarkSquad.com. But like talking about like the actors, like the amount of amazing acting that is just people like standing there on the show. It's just I'm like you're standing there, but you're doing it like real evil or real cool.
The moment that like took my breath away of just like the range of acting came courtesy Jeffrey Wright, and it was after Bernard Lold. I'm making a serious point, but I just ruined it. But he's just killed Teresa, and for the moment, Ford has let him keep his memories, so he realizes what he's done, and he's grieving over the fact that he's just killed Teresa. Then Ford tells him to limit his emotional affect, and he's still grieving it, and you can see it in his eyes, but he's like drawn back a bit. Then his memory is wiped, and he's full on host again, and just like the range of hitting those 3 notes where you see him fully human for a moment just in this grief, and then slightly rein back, and then full on host. It was just like chills, like watching him convey the range. And Evan Rachel Wood is very good at conveying Dolores as full on Dolores versus when she's in her kind of conversations with Bernard, but also in analysis mode where they step fully back into like being the robot. Like the range of acting there was just phenomenal.
All of the hosts, like as you were just saying, the degree to which they had to sort of turn stuff on and off, like just on a dime, go from being in one sort of emotional space to another. It was just like,
Yeah, I have a bad habit when I'm taking in media of like thinking about the production side of things and like what it would be like to act in the scene. And I feel like that didn't happen at all. Like I was so in the story, and that's a huge tribute to the actors.
Also, Thandie Newton.
Yes.
Same. Reiterating everything we've already said, but we can't not.
There's a degree to which the whole Felix storyline where he's just giving in to her demands is kind of convenient, but also it's Thandie Newton. So I'm like, okay.
It's fine.
Like she's a badass and she's awesome, so maybe I would too.
I get it. Thandie Newton is naked and holding a sharp object. Like, yeah, sure.
Take whatever you want. Kill us all. It's cool.
From the very beginning, she just exudes this power, even though she hasn't been like increased stat yet. But yeah, she's amazing.
This is only kind of related. Like this is going to be a
segue
a
magic.
little bit of segue magic here. But I want to talk about the nudity that was used here because you mentioned Thandie being naked in that scene, but there's a lot of nudity in this whole thing, and it's like almost equal opportunity. Like there's a lot of full frontal male nudity, which you never see on TV, and this is HBO to be fair, but I think comparatively, Game of Thrones has a lot of nudity as well, and I think we've seen one, maybe two full frontal shots.
It's only like in the last season or two that they were like, okay,
penis is a thing. Mostly it's just female nudity. So this had almost equal, I would say, and it's just a lot of nudity, and I think it's used a lot to convey the power dynamics between the humans and the host. The hosts are always naked when they're downstairs and they're being worked on. They're stored naked, and you even have that one scene where one of the techs has covered one of the hosts, and Ford walks over and is like, why did you cover them? They can't feel cold. They can't feel shame. And he like uncovers him. So there's that whole idea of like the host not being real and being naked always. Now, my issue with it, and I don't know. I think my issue with it is that I don't give HBO credit because they've built up ill will with me.
Yeah.
And they use nudity a lot in Game of Thrones as set dressing. So it was hard for me to differentiate when it was like useful in the story and when it was conveying things and it was just like nudity. So I don't know if you guys felt that way as well.
I'm going to answer your question, but first I also want to like put a pin in this because this is everything you were saying. I feel like we're going to have our next episode is about Atomic Blonde, and there's a whole conversation to be had about how nudity is used there.
Okay.
And so this is just me like acknowledging next week on the podcast. That said, I feel a certain amount of uneasiness with HBO nudity in part because of that question of just like, the ill will and whatnot that they've built up with me with like the way that they deploy it. Like on the flip side of that, I think it did serve all of the narrative purposes that you outlined. And so, I don't know, I think it was used effectively and it didn't really bother me that much.
I agree. And this is something that when I first started watching was the immediate striking thing for me, because I feel like this is the first time that I had seen media that wasn't like over-sexualizing nudity. And that was really striking to me. And so it made me think, okay, then why are they choosing to do this? Was it just an HBO thing, or was it that they were trying to depersonalize these things, basically these robots? There were a couple places where, like, I'm trying to remember when it was, but one of the techs, like, touches which host was it? It was like the one Clementine. Yeah. And I felt like bringing that into the story and kind of making it like this non-consensual thing was weird. And so that kind of altered the way I felt about it. But also, I mean, maybe that's a commentary on something, but overall, I was interested in how they used nudity as a way to separate, like, make you separate the hosts from the people.
I feel like the thing for me is, unlike on Game of Thrones, which is really what we're talking about when we talk about HBO, what we're saying is Game of Thrones. I feel like unlike on Game of Thrones, the nudity here almost always, I can't think of any counter examples, but probably there are some, but almost always felt deliberate and intentional in a way that, like Game of Thrones, it was often just like, look, here's boobs.
Right.
So that is a recurring theme across all of these media conversations, is to what degree do I feel like you have made a thoughtful choice versus you're just like doing shit because you're not really thinking about it. And by extension, you are demonstrating a lack of concern for both your story and for me as an audience member. And the nudity here didn't make me feel that way.
I don't know what this will reveal about the show or about me as a viewer, but the one like thing that was super impactful to me in terms of like the way that they use nudity, and this is such a small detail, which is why it's probably just a me thing, but the way they always sat on these very low stools, and it always almost looked uncomfortable and was very unflattering to anybody. You have this whole cast of like really hot people and then they're sitting on like these low stools and it's almost unflattering. And I don't know, just that position of the way that they are sitting anytime they're being kind of examined or whatnot was just a way that I thought it was very clinical nudity for the most part.
Yes.
You did see some flashes of like nudity when there was like up in the saloon or whatnot, but that was few and far between. I think for the most part, it was very, very clinical, which is very strange. And I think going back to like the whole rape scene with Dolores in the first episode, you don't see nudity there at all.
Right.
And there's so much implied rape and like fuzzy consent things because are these hosts alive or are they not? But all of that is implied, and there's so much. The violence that you get is very physical, like gunshot wounds and stabbings and whatnot. But when it comes to like the rape and stuff, you almost fill in those gaps yourself, and all of the nudity is on the clinical side of it. Even though you do have those moments where like the texts are, you get the one kiss between Elsie and Clementine, and you get the one guy who's like jerking off in front of Hector. So those are like two. But then you get all of these other mentions of people using the host. The employees using the host like kind of underground when they're offline. But I think more than anything, that's a reminder that like, hey, the humans are the worst in this story. Cool. Yes, they are.
The humans suck.
Yeah, it's not presented as acceptable.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's like those reminders that even the people in charge, and especially the people in charge, have ways of abusing the power. Even the ones that are the lowest on the totem pole, like even those guys are complicit in what's happening here in a lot of different ways.
Yes.
We talked a little bit about the ideas of can good people come to Westworld and like what's, good and bad versus being in this world. And I think I had a moment of like thinking, okay, I would never, even if I had the money, spend money to do that. Like no part of that seems like a vacation I want.
Yeah, right.
Apart from like the killing and like the sex and whatever, there's like treasure hunts. I'm like, no, I don't want to be on horseback and like the desert. Like, no, that's not. But then there were moments where the show really reminded me of video games, and especially of like the collateral damage in video games that you never really think about when you're like shooting up things. And then I don't know, there was like that parallel of like, this is a game, this is the collateral damage, but bringing the collateral damage to the forefront and being like, hey, like this is a thing that made me again just like, oh, I feel weird.
I think this is the way the sequence played out, but there was the punched up saloon scene or
the heist.
Yeah, the punched up heist scene in order to basically provide cover for removing like 10% of the hosts who had this glitchy code. I think it was like the next scene or right around that, they have the conversation about whether the hosts dream. I forget if it was Bernard or Elsie who was explaining this to someone, but that, like they give them the concept of dreams. And mostly that is because that is like just in case like a wipe doesn't happen, so that like they never remember the fucked up things that happened to them. And I think like that is right in line with this idea of like, yeah, all of the collateral damage that like stuff must be done to guard against the quote unquote collateral damage, like having to grapple with being collateral damage. Speaking of the collateral damage and them remembering being collateral damage, we are having this conversation now because the second season of Westworld is about to start. We all just took a brief break that you didn't hear so that we could watch the teaser for season 2, the most recently released trailer for season 2.
Did you ever stop to wonder about your actions? The price you'd have to pay if there was a reckoning.
And looks fucking cool. Real excited about it. Is there anything in particular that like jumped out at you?
I think that this season gave me a little bit of this feeling that I got from season 1 of Runaways, in that it was very prologue-y. So season 1 of Runaways is like a prologue. They run away at the end of the season, and it's like, okay, what's coming next? And this kind of seems the same way. Like, it seems so almost like you're telling two different stories now. Like you've gone from this whole idea of like the theme park and the workings behind it, and all of that is gone to shit, it looks like, in season 2, and now it's like a very much a revolt, us against them kind of thing, which I'm here for, obviously, especially because I think we had this first season to invest in the characters and really figure out like the lines drawn in the sand, like kind of what side are we on. So I think I don't know, it looks super cool. And the part that gave me like the first visible out loud reaction was when you saw the host that wasn't even fully finished yet.
Yeah.
And he's animated and like walking around and pushing people over. Like, what?
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted so badly with this first season was to understand the real world more. And I feel like this second season is going to, at least even in flashbacks maybe or something, it's going to give you more of a context for why Westworld even happened and like what was going on that allowed that. I'm very excited about that aspect.
I'm excited for the robot uprising in general. I'm here for it. I'm jazzed. I'm excited. I'm also excited about the sheer number of outfits everyone had. Mostly because, like, in order for Dolores, like Dolores had like half a dozen outfits at least from and like spanning a variety of like time periods too. She was wearing like contemporary clothes and stuff. So in order for her to like cover that range of fashion, that means she's gonna have to be in a like wide array of contexts.
Yep.
And I'm excited. I'm excited about that.
There was a piece at the end of season 1, I think it was the very last episode, where you see Samurai like down in the bottom level.
Yes, that's
and
right.
I thought we would be exposed to some different area of the park or a different like similar park. We don't see any of that in the trailer, so I'm wondering how that fits in, or if that was a throwaway. Or
There were some aspects in
I
that
didn't
trailer.
see it. I didn't
so there
notice.
was a geisha look at one point.
Oh yes, I did see.
yeah.
And there were some samurai. So this is the first trailer where I feel like they've done more of that.
Okay.
Because the previous trailers, you're like, Samurai World,
Yeah,
what is this?
most of the previous trailers before this one were
Eastworld?
just like spanning the like they were like the big wide like aerial shots of like here's out on the plane, and then like Dolores saying something cryptic. That's like all of the trailers up to this point.
Okay, great.
This is the first trailer that was like scenes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here's stuff that's gonna happen.
Typical.
There actually is a logo out there that is SW instead of WW for Samurai World. Oh. So I don't...
I think they missed the
there
opportunity to do Eastworld.
They did.
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, yeah, clearly.
It was a
Clearly.
disappointment.
We got some Samurai World truthers. East World truthers. Well, on that note, I think it is time to end this episode of Snark Squad Pod. Thank you so much to Abby for joining us this week.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to all of you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode or the podcast in general, please rate and review us on iTunes. You can also come share your thoughts and feelings about this episode over on the blog at SnarkSquad.com or on Twitter at Snark_squad. I am at Sweeney Says.
You can find me at My Name is Marines.
And you can find me at ABI_JEAN.
Thank you to Stefan Chin for the fancy theme music that is playing us out right now, and we will be back in your ears again next week. Bye.
Bye.